Hello, good evening. Welcome to Chess Comedy Books 21. I'm James Pratt, and I'm going to look at some World Championship books today. The first thing to say about a World Championship is that it is a match of a number of games. People seem to think that a match is just one game, like a football match. Well, it isn't. In chess, a single encounter is a game. A series of games is a match. We begin with a very special book indeed. This has gone through several editions and is published by Hannon Russell from the US of A. And this is the match between Tal and Botvinnik of 1960. I paid £4.49 for this. I think I did awfully well, don't you? This is beautifully annotated. It's in long form algebraic with clock times against the moves, and perhaps demonstrates just exactly how to write a World Championship book. Gives a little bit of background, as you might expect. After long consideration at home and short reflection over the board, in other words, you're being told that they were there to see the game, Black welcomes the possibility of transposing into the classical Queen's Gambit. It was necessary to take into account that Botvinnik often employed the exchange or so-called Carlsberg variation of the Queen's Gambit with great success. There you are. And this was played in 1960. This was Botvinnik losing the World Championship, and then he won it back again, and then he lost it. And finally, he didn't win it back again. The notes are by Tal. Is this a surprise? Talking about Botvinnik playing the French defence. How can it be? And here at the end, wreathed in laurels, here's Tal, who won the title. Look at that. Nice photo. Tal looking almost numb, I should think. In tournaments, the games that decide the final places are almost always played in the closing round. In other words, it's close. Well, sounds like I'm stuck for words. I'm not stuck for praise. This is a good book. It really is a good book. There you are. The next book we're going to look at was the World Championship that never was. This is the second match between Fischer and Spassky. Fischer had been out of chess for 20 years and Spassky was largely retired, but a sponsor came forward and Bobby perked up his ears, possibly for pure financial reasons, and who can blame him for that? And they went and played on a strange island in strange circumstances. After 20 years in the chess wilderness without having played a single serious game since Reykjavik, that's Reykjavik 1972, Fischer returns to do battle with his old rival Spassky in war-torn Yugoslavia for a $5 million purse. Well, who wouldn't get out of bed for that? And there's Spassky carrying his train, and there's Bobby with the orb and the torch. No, it's not an old lipstick. And this book is by International Grandmaster Raymond Keane. And it is no doubt one of Ray's instant books. I wonder whether he travelled to watch the match. I know that Bobby did lay down the law about what he wanted and what he didn't. Looking through this, the games are lightly annotated. Fischer won the opening game, but then fell behind in the match, only to win 4 games out of 5 in the middle of the match. The openings were a bit cagey, as I recall. Queen's Gambit accepted, or Sicilians via funny move orders. I'm told apart from the opening game, the games were a bit disappointing. Well, as far as I'm concerned, to have Fischer back, albeit for only 1 match, was exciting and probably did the game a power of good. There it is. It's a Batsford. It's a nice cover, isn't it, by any standards? And it's by Raymond Keane. This is something else. This is something else. This is an American publication. I should think this is going to be pretty hard to get hold of in this country. Each game of the match, fully reported, described and annotated by Bent Larsen. In other words, the Danish Grandmaster. It has an introduction by, surprisingly, Michael Steen. So how about that? It was Korchnai's second for the match, amongst others. But principally, his second was Raymond Keane. Here's some cartoons. There's he cracking the spine. Who have we got there then? Capablanca and Alekhine. They're trying to drum up some interest after pawn to king 4, pawn to king 4. Psychologically interesting. The French serve Korchnai very well against Spassky and again against Karpov in 1974. That would have been the candidates' final. So why the change? I stick to the French until it refutes it, but Korchnai keeps the French in reserve. Look, here's my rare variation of the Louis. In my camp, we have studied it very deeply. Oh, I bet they have too. Well, just because this is by Larsen, it doesn't mean to say it's a good book. I think it's probably quite good. Nothing has gone into in too much detail. Korchnai's English seconds, there you are, that reinforces what I said. Raymond Keane and Michael Steen did their best on many occasions during the match to keep the psychological warfare within reasonable limits. All this rubbish about yogurt and Nanda Marga sect and flying yogis and people looking at the pieces and stuff. Every game is fully presented with annotations and commentary by Grandmaster Bent Larsen, one of the very top players in the world today, and Grandmaster Michael Steen, one of course has seconds in the match itself. Quite an unusual book. There it is. Published by Mackay. Here's one of Ray's instant books. Quite a nice cover, isn't it? Not inappropriate. There are the 2 contestants, Korchnai, who re-qualified for the World Championship, and Karpov. Korchnai lost pretty heavily, 6-2 in this match. There were a lot of draws, and it was no disgrace. I don't think anybody much else in the world, not even Kasparov at that stage, could have unhorsed Karpov. Ray's book, Korchnai is answering, he wrote a book, Anti-Chess, there, and they are responding to it. If you like matches where the 2 players are sniping at each other, not just across the board, but away from the board, and I don't, but you may, then this sort of thing is your sort of thing. And your sort of thing is World Championship chess, the 1970s and 80s. I think these days I have to conclude that things have calmed down a bit. Maybe they've even grown up a little, but I wouldn't push my luck to say so. There we are. Look, there's some discussion. The fact that the moves aren't in bold strike, but here are and that's a completely different game. Shows you the depth they go into, but most of it is fairly straightforward. He's probably raised articles from the Spectator or from the Times, which he's recycled. He talks about the Petrov, one of black's most resilient counters to 1e4. Defense was elaborated jointly by the Russo-Finnish master Karl Friedrich Janisch and Alexandra Petrov, and gives the dates of the two guys, and that's why it's called the Russian defense. Sounds all right to me. There it is. It was $3.95. I can remember thinking when it came out, that's a little bit expensive. And he also deals at the back, nice little touch actually, with the Ladies' World Championship between Jabrdnitsa and Alexandria. It turned out to be a draw, 8-all. Alexandria fought back very bravely in the second half. There we are. This is something slightly different. It's a more colourful, possibly more aggressive, if that's the right word, cover. From 21 years ago, the authors are Nigel Davies and Andrew Martin. And this is the match that was held in London. And this was the match where Kasparov lost 2-0 with a series of draws. He didn't win a single game. I spoke to Malcolm Payne at the time about this, and he replied he was out-prepared. Well, I don't know, but what I do know is it's unusual to see these guys collaborating. So that in itself is well worthy of our time. Looking through, the fonts are a bit cumbersome. But I don't really think that matters. You look down here, it looks like something I've done, but that's all right. That's okay. Goodness me. Kasparov, the genius from Baku and world champion for 15 years, defended his title in what experts predict will be the toughest match yet. His challenger, Vladimir Kramnik, was the only player alive to withstand the champion's whirlpool attacks, emerging from their 23 previous encounters with an even score. I remember the venue was pretty unsatisfactory. There it is. And the referee, Lothar Schmidt, and he was referee right back to Fischer-Spassky, came outside and was wandering along, possibly having a cigarette, I don't know, wandering along the towpath, and he saw this bridge. And he said, I prefer looking at this bridge rather than the chess. That is not really an insult to the two players. It just shows you that in the end, you can have too much of a good thing. This is when they started to throw up the Berlin Wall. 3 knight f6 in the Lopez, and also, as I've just said, using the Petrov's defense. Four great games, one good game, and 2 PR disasters, says Stuart Rubin. Most unprofessional, disgraceful. The two players cannot do this. GM, Keane. I can live with this rate of pay. Danny King. It was drawn after 11 moves. That's only one of the games, but it was a later one. Here, from 10 years prior to that, from a very go-ahead publisher. Once again, and you've heard me say this so often before, the fonts are a bit small. They're the best chess players in the world and the bitterest of rivals. Now, after 130 previous encounters with little to choose between them in pure chess ability, Kasparov is seeking to establish his superiority over Karpov. And this book is written by a variety of people, somebody called Gary Kasparov, Efim Geller, Anatoly Lane, and somebody else whose name I can't even pronounce and isn't really a chess person at all, I don't think. He might be. There they are. In other words, a variety of sources. Nice to see they've got the clock times against the moves. See that? The moves here, and next to it, a sort of a decimal, saying how long they thought over that move, which I think is a nice little touch. This was probably one of the closer matches. They were all pretty close, weren't they, between Karpov and Kasparov. They played 24 games. "40 moves in 2.5 hours. You wouldn't get that now. Kasparov's team: Asmai Ashparashvili, Dolmatov, Gurevich, goes on, and his mother Clara. Karpov's team was headed by Krogius. Well, if it was headed by Krogius, it wasn't for analytical reasons. He was by then a pretty old guy, still alive, but he's more like a sort of little KGB general. Ron Henley. This is curious that Ron Henley, as an American, I think he must have met him. Ron Henley is a coin dealer, and I think he must have met him somewhere. Plugats, Zaitsev, Alexei Kuzmin, not to be confused with Gennady Kuzmin, who died a couple of years ago, but I think people do confuse the two. There we are. I think it's probably a goodish book. It's quite nicely laid out. Nothing overwhelming. There you go. Now, this is something entirely different. And no, it's not a book by Monty Python. When you look at the cover, it's not really obvious what you're reading. Any amount of text. Obviously, the king, the Black King, stands here like an icon. Maybe it is an icon, I don't know. This is a new era, how Garry Kasparov changed the world of chess. And it's his match against Deep Blue. It has an enormous amount of background. And the moves are there. Of course they're there. But it is... it has the 1995 match against Anand. And also 1996. And the rematch. Garry Kasparov versus Deep Blue. And, don't faint, some photographs. Here he is playing Anand. There he is. Anand proved, eventually he did come to the title, a very dignified, active and likeable world champion. Here's Kasparov with somebody claiming to be his wife called Julia. I wonder how many people can claim to be his wife. I didn't know that. He has children too these days. Yes, the notation is all a bit frantic. Instead of having it in columns, it reads a bit like a set of log tables. A bit impenetrable, but it does contain a lot of information, and it's an unusual book. So there you are, probably one you haven't seen. Here we have Ray doing what he does best. The centenary match. Kasparov, Karpov 3. With Raymond Keane and David Goodman. David Goodman was his brother-in-law. It is his brother-in-law. The dynamism and aggression which 22-year-old Garry Kasparov showed when wresting the title from the world's champion Anatoly Karpov last year has made him the people's champion. I'm not sure about that. Might be. Through the initiative of Raymond Keane, London hosted, well done, Ray, London hosted the first half of this epic return confrontation between two grandmasters who stand head and shoulders above the world's top players. Both players were present in London and Leningrad. Both authors, sorry. Yes, I think they were. This is not done by the usual printer. It was quite a brief guide. I mean, it has notes. I quite like it. Text is a bit small, but the match was very interesting. Unfortunately, this book, which I got sent from America when I was editing BCM, is awful. It's really terrible. All the games from the World Chess Championship match, plus previous games between Anand and Carlsen, and a groundbreaking history of the World Chess Champions, including representative games by each of the 19 prior holders of the world title. That's part of the title of the book. Well, I can think of a few titles for the book. It's presented as a series of disjointed chapters. I mean, these positions, have they got anything to do with the World Championship? Ah, it's Carlsen Anand Blitz game. Here's a game by Averbach, the well-known World Championship contender in 1950. Played in the candidates, I think. So obviously in 2015 or whenever this was, here he is back again, being quoted for little or no reason. The games are given about 3 times. And there's a game by Gwaine Jones against Morosevich, for no better reason probably than it was in the Times column, because they had a rest day in the World Championship. And Ray gave it to one of his minions. It may have been Julian Simple. It may not have been Julian Simple. And I think this is all a bit of a shame. Suddenly they lurch into some other notation. Look at that. All capital B's and funny little spindly letter numbers running down. Probably reprinted. And here's a game from this World Championship. Spassky Fischer, Mar del Plata, 1960. Why? Oh, here's a chapter about Smyslov and one about Botvinnik, who by then would have been dead. And here's a game by Steinitz. And yes, I know he was the first world chess champion, but we don't really need to know about him all over again, particularly as we know anyway. And if we don't, we should buy more books by Raymond Keane. And here's Ray doing what he does best, talking about Staunton. The exact relevance of this escapes me. Nice cover photograph. That's where the niceness ends. Here's something completely different, which I had some association with at the time because I knew the publisher. And on the cover, we have Bob Wade, Tony Miles, David Bronstein, William Hartston, Les Blackstock, it gets better, Andrew Martin, Roger Lancaster, and the one and only Hilary Thomas. There we are. There we are. Hilary Thomas, eh? What can happen to him? As you can see, the games are very deeply annotated. There is a happy mixture of notes and quotes. And here are the same games, I mean all of them, not using notation, but just using diagrams. I'm not certain whether this works entirely. I mean, they did this with Fischer Spassky. I think there was a book by Larry Evans, which was, I mean, they give you notes, but just with diagrams. Do you prefer that? Some people would, I think. I definitely would say some people like it. Others find it, as I do, a bit unnecessary You could even call it experimental. Here's a picture of the late Tony Miles giving a commentary. I suppose I went to that at some point. There he is with a Kevin Keegan perm. And on the back, something I can't decipher any more than you can. It looks like Arabic. The London match was held in Leningrad. The match was held in Leningrad and London. So why we need that on the back, I don't know. But the publisher was Mr. Ali Amin, and he ran a cafe, and I used to go there quite often. The last, at least the last for now, is a hardback edition of, for what for many was the greatest chess match ever, Fischer versus Spassky. And it was written by Gligerich. Couldn't get better than that, could you? Very strong player, twice world title candidate. He would have been in Iceland to see it all. And my God, there was a lot happening. It's an old-fashioned English descriptive notation. There we are. Proving that you don't have to pad it out. See, it's not, it's only quite small or smallish. You don't have to pad it all out with stuff written weeks, months in advance, or even stuff that's been in other World Championship books. I don't know if Gligerich ever wrote another World Championship book. He collaborated with Wade on one which has all the games, but in terms of a single match like this, a single volume, I don't think he did. This was published by Fontana, I think. No, it's not Fontana, it's Collins. There we are. Still around if you wanted it. 50 years later, nearly 50 years later. Well worth your time. Not necessarily the expert's book of the match, but quite good. Well, there we are. At the moment, we don't have a World Championship going on, but we do have online competitions, which is better than nothing. And when we are back to normal, as indeed we will be, I dare say that Magnus Carlsen will be defending his title against somebody well known to us, well known to him, and very difficult to overcome. Thank you very much. I've been James Pratt. This has been CCB 21.